Okay, welcome to the Namaste Center, everyone. It's June 10th, 2012, and we're delighted that each of you are here today, and those of you listening are here ready to receive a very inspiring and great message from two wonderful teachers. And they're from the Asheville area, John and Claudia here. And I'm going to give you a little background, and then we're going to get started in some discussion. And I think you all are going to get really a lot of great information and great pleasure and joy from John and Claudia today. So anyway, John and Claudia have a healing center in Asheville, and it's called
Black Swan Counseling and Mentoring.
There you go, Black Swan Counseling and Mentoring. And it's a wonderful healing center. I've been on their website, and it's wonderful. And they're so diverse. They offer everything from sound therapy to grief therapy. And John, about you, you are a psychotherapist, a musician, educator, grief and loss specialist, and a creator of a unique form of music-enhanced therapy called archetypal resonance therapy, which incorporates the use of music and sound into the framework of Jungian archetypes. Your concepts and techniques have evolved from an extensive 30-year study of cross-cultural therapeutic music traditions, including 9 years studying classical music of India. John has 25 years of experience as a professional counselor and has worked in a variety of clinical settings, including community and hospital-based mental health treatment centers, therapeutic, foster care, and hospice. John was executive director of a regional grief counseling center near Albany, New York, specializing in sudden traumatic death loss, and subsequently trained counselors in New York City following the 9/11 terrorist attacks. In addition, John has studied with Sufi teachers for over 3 decades. We're going to get into a little more about what John does, but he's getting ready to write a book. We'll talk about that shortly as well. And Claudia J. Lemarquand. Okay, yes. I said it right. Has been an intuitive counselor for over 40 years. Now you're going to love this. As a child, she had a visionary experience that showed her we are all related. She was and is taught by her non-physical Lemurian teachers about the nature of energy and energetic fields and how human consciousness and the entire human experience arise out of these fields. Claudia is a lifetime student of consciousness. Her early and ongoing psychic experiences led her to the study of spirituality and psychotherapy. Claudia earned an MA degree in counseling and psychology in 1987 and attended the CC Institute and is certified as an archetypal pattern analyst. She's been a counselor in a variety of clinical settings, worked with sexually abused children and their families, been admitted in family court as an expert witness in child abuse sexual cases, and worked with hospice where she ran spirituality and counseling groups. She's a mentor and educator who specializes in working with the confluence of spirituality, psychotherapy, and the arts. And she loves to explore dreams, myths, and images. Her non-physical teachers call her a broadband channel, which they humorously describe as being a satellite dish rather than having a satellite dish. She helps others to reveal and develop their own intuitive gifts and potential to expand consciousness based on the experience of a more soulful, infused, and integrated identity. So everybody, let's welcome John and Claudia. Thank you all for being here. Yes, and thank you.
Wonderful prayer.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Well, I tell you, where's the conversation begin? I mean, we could be here for hours upon end, but I know that both of you all, 2 things you have in common, which I'd like to discuss first, is first of all, the archetypes and the Jungian psychology. Who would like to start expressing a little bit about that?
I'll start, and then you can with the music part. But archetypes in the Jungian sense are the templates that all of our experience are built on. And I'm sure, probably everybody knows there are certain words that go across cultures and across time periods. If you say the word mother, if you say the word father, if you say the word healer, child, you know, there are numbers of ideas that we have that set the template for all of human experience. And within those templates, there is the individual experience. So I think we're always, you know, balancing between sort of the collective potentials of a given energetic field, as in the energetic field of the mother, or of the father. We have Father's Day coming up, so it's the energetic field of the father, and then our own experience on a personal level of what that energetic, what the expression has been in our own life. And we tend to see the whole field through the filter of what our own, our own experience has been. So that's sort of archetypes in a nutshell.
Okay. What would you like to add to that, John?
Well, the core of the work that I've been doing over the past almost 30 years has been taking the idea of archetypes and moving them into the realm of sound and music. And while, as Claudia gave some examples, people are familiar with, you might say, even the more mythological archetypes like the hero, the heroine, the healer, the teacher, and so forth. For some reason, people don't talk too much about archetypes of sound and music. And having an undergraduate degree in classical music and psychology, and then having studied Indian classical music for many years, as well as the music from a lot of other cultures, I started to notice that there are very clear archetypal patterns in music. For example, every culture in the world has musical instruments that are plucked musical instruments, bowed stringed instruments, drums, bells or chimes, you know, such as, you know, the Tibetan singing bowls are one of them. They appear in all cultures, flutes of every kind. And so we have certain universal groups of instruments that always appear. But one of the things that really opened up a whole therapeutic world for me was the study of classical Indian music, because when you learn one of the melody forms in classical Indian music that are called ragas, and raga, by the way, in Sanskrit actually means that which colors the mind. So even though it's the term that's used for the different musical scales or modes, you might say, it has other more subtle connotations to it also. But when you learn these ragas, you just don't learn the musical piece. They're also meant to be played at certain hours of the day, certain seasons of the year, to help attune you to those times of the day, those particular seasons. And you know, as I started working more and more with the ragas, I realized that in Indian classical art in general, they make no distinction at all between psychology, spirituality, and the arts. They're one. They don't even have the concept that they can be separated out. You know, it's kind of a Western idea to sort of break those particular pieces down. So when you were learning a raga, you were learning the whole therapeutic application. You learn what part of the emotions and the mind are affected by the raga. You learn the aspects of one's spiritual growth that are affected by certain ragas, and you learn these as part of it. And it's done in a very non-intellectual way. And if, like in any musical culture, you can have musicians who are technically spectacular, but if they don't embody that inner soul, that inner feeling of a raga, to the Indian audience, they just don't make sense at all. Nothing is really happening. So I can perhaps give just one quick example of how these different scales have this universal quality, because I also started teaching people Indian music and working with people with vocal music, and I started using different ragas of these. And what I started to notice was that certain ragas seem to have a universal appeal. They seem to always strike people in a very deep way. Some of the ragas were based individuals, some would like them, some wouldn't, but there was a whole group of ragas that I found whenever I used one of those, it seemed to push very, very deeply into people's psyche and move things at very, very deep levels. And then one of the things that was exciting is when I was finishing my master's thesis, which I ended up writing a 450-page master's thesis on archetypes of sound and music, and I'm in the process of actually editing a whole section of that out, now to get it published. But when I was doing my final research for that, I wanted to get some information about Chinese medicine and Chinese musical scales, and I was having a hard time finding some original source material on that. Finally, at the very end, I did, and I discovered a Chinese text that had 5 scales associated with the 5 elements of Chinese medicine. And I had actually picked out 5 ragas that I felt were very, very universal, that had this real archetypal impact on people. And I was thrilled to discover that the 5 scales of Chinese medicine and music were the exact 5 ragas that I had discovered on my own working with people over the years. So I know that there's really something to this. And like many of the scales appear in different cultures, like this particular one we're familiar with folk music. And this, by the way, is the bansuri food of North India. And other scales that appear that are part of this group is one kind of a late night raga in Indian classical music, a very, very profound scale that is more like this. Of what totally different flavors those have, and you can probably, even just hearing the 2 very briefly, you can tell how they could have a very specific therapeutic value depending on what somebody is working through in their own issues.
So when someone's seeing you for therapy, would you play music for them?
I would do a combination of things. I offer, of course, you might, I don't know if you want to call it traditional psychotherapy, but if people want to work with a musical piece, sometimes I would create things, pieces to sing together with them that are very simple. Oftentimes I take people through guided imagery using live music, and I sort of developed a little system because Indian classical music uses drones in the background, where I can actually take people on a guided meditation and do live music at the same time, where I kind of go back and forth between instruments, and the drones kind of hold it together using Tibetan singing bowls, flutes, and a number of different instruments. So I would help with that piece of it. And then just very, very quickly, because Claudia has such fabulous stuff to share here. What I do also is work with sacred words, archetypal words from ancient cultures. And while traditional psychotherapy is so much focused on delving a lot into the past, finding out what's broken, diagnosing what's broken, and all the emphasis is on fixing what's broken, you might say. And my work is very, very future-oriented, where I help people set up a resonance or an alignment to the optimal future self that they wish to become. So in a sense, like you're putting your optimal future self out there, and that future self is pulling you forward rather than having to push yourself forward as you're leaving things behind. And I started with Sufi teachers for many years, and used words from Hebrew, Aramaic, Arabic, and Sanskrit. These archetypal words help people to align with certain qualities that they're wanting to work on. Like somebody that wants to bring in an aspect of the divine light of intelligence, as well as what the Sufis call the uncreated light, the light that existed before light first appeared in the universe, in the form of stars or fire or something like that creates the light. This is the uncreated original light that was before all that came, and it's nur. So, and in Aramaic it's nura. So many of these languages, the words are almost identical because Arabic, Hebrew, and Aramaic all have the exact same roots, and a lot of people aren't aware of that. Compassion in Arabic and the 99 names of God is Rahim. In Hebrew is Rachamim, and in Aramaic is Rahim. So I would put together some of these sacred words to help people get into alignment with the optimum self that they wish to become, and then I usually set it to a very simple melody based on some of the Indian ragas, and then I teach that to them just by singing it together.
That's beautiful. And I love your future-oriented therapy idea. I think that's fabulous. So I wanted to talk to you. I know you have a connection with non-physical beings who give you great messages. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. Just to do a little backtrack, when I was really little, I was about maybe 4 or 5, I lived in Brooklyn, and we had the elevated train that went by the house, and you know, the sort of the knowledge of that train always there was something that was always with me. And I had an experience where all of a sudden, I call it all the lights went on. It was like I saw the grid. I saw this big golden grid where the train was the metaphor. And it was about all the arrivals, departures, connections, relationship to the people in the houses, things that people were aware of, things that people weren't aware of. But I saw at that point, I was like, wow, we are all connected. Everything's connected. And it was sort of the thing that I call it launched the pinball for me. That I became, you know, it launched the little ball into the maze. And it set me off on my whole path. To say, if this is true, if we are all connected in this way, then what is this world all about? And my teachers started coming in to visit with me when I was also very small. And I didn't know they weren't physical, like a lot of people that see things. I just assumed that I saw these very tall blue people. And I just simply assumed that my parents went out and they came in. And then I started to think, I'm supposed to be asleep. I better not say anything. I don't know, you know, I kind of didn't know what to do with it. And at one point, as my parents were leaving after kissing me goodnight, I saw the teachers come in. My parents walked through them. The teachers kind of looked at me and went, you know, gave me this, and I was like, oh, I get it. I get it. I am looking at something else. And they have been with me all my life. I don't always see them physically. As I've gotten older, there's not such a need to have the visual piece all the time. That was for childhood. But they, you know, it sounds like sci-fi, but for me it's been my life. They took me places, for instance, out on what appeared to be a ship seeing Earth from a distance. And having a very, very broad perspective. And then sort of being dropped back in to a small day-to-day, here I am contained in this little body, this little personality, which they call aspects of soul. That personalities are constructs, that it's an energetic construct that is designed to experience the world for a specific period of time with a specific sort of lens and focus and different qualities of the energetic field that we each carry. And that as we recognize that this is the construct, so we're all kind of talking about the same thing, future self, and then it's Sandy who talked about a larger identity, that this is the key. It's to value the small identity. It serves a purpose, but to be not overly invested in it because it's a very small portion of the picture, and to be open to many other intelligences. Love runs the universe. I mean, that's a given. It's the highest quality that we can describe. That's our word for what we know to be the highest quality that we can experience. And I think it's obviously so much more vast than we can experience in these bodies.
So what would you describe love as being?
Ooh, I mean, let me see. I've got to close my eyes for that one, because that's because love is a frequency, and it's a frequency that attunes us to soul's purpose, and that as we resonate to soul's purpose, then we begin to carry that energetic vibration as we become the instrument. We become the instrument of that resonance. And that is the resonance that we carry into our experience. And it doesn't always mean that it's all kind of bright and light. I mean, one of my, if you want to call it a beef with some of the New Age metaphysical community, is that people sometimes don't want to do their shadow work, which has to do with, it's that shamanic piece of retrieving parts of the self that we find unacceptable, and some cast out pieces that have been cast out in other life experiences. But as we resonate more and more to that frequency of love, we become that larger, more inclusive being who's capable, even when our own shadow things come up or when we encounter those in other people, to recognize that, you know, as the Buddhists say, it's not so much only my shadow, it's the shadow. It's not my anger, it's the anger. That there is a resonance, emotion has a resonance, that, you know, and that as the emotion resonates in a certain way, we have the capacity with a greater expanded consciousness to transform that resonance into something of a higher frequency.
Beautiful. Well, I know that, John, you had mentioned that you all had received a message, and it was very hopeful and positive. What?
We'll let him start, and then I'll pick it up.
You start?
Because the reason is because I'm in trance, and I am receiving information, but until I hear it, I'm not completely aware of what it is.
Okay. And what happened the other night, out of the blue, Claudia said, oh, I've got pressure on my head. She has a certain set of indicators when what she calls an incoming call, that she feels pressure at the top of her head and all sorts of different things, and it came right out of the blue, and she went, ooh, I have to sit down and check this out. Well, almost as soon as she closed her eyes, she said she got the phrase, the world of tomorrow. And then what ended up coming through, and it was the first time that this had ever occurred with this particular group, you know, Claudia, you mentioned in her bio that, you know, she considers herself a broadband channel, that she's not just associated with one group or one individual being or intelligence that she's channeling. And a group came through that presented themselves as a group from our future. And they were also, what was interesting, they said that they were using other spirit guides as intermediaries to help translate, you might say, between the dimensions of time. And they were also working hard at their end to, like, you might say, find us in time and make this connection. But one of the things that they said that they came forth for the first time, and they will continue to be available, is they come from our future and the future that became a very, very positive Earth. And they said, you know, we want to help you during this time of transition, not that we're going to do the work for you, but when you're at a place of transition like this, where everything is changing, and it looks like a lot of chaos on the surface, and we kind of wonder, is this ever actually going to really turn out okay? They were saying, yes, we wanted to tell you that it did turn out, or it does turn out okay, but we want to help you with some insights to maybe give you perspective on things. And one of the things that they did say, that the core work for people in our era is self-love. And I know, as both, we know, psychotherapists, and I know in my own personal life, self-love in certain areas can always be really tough, so I think we're all working with that. But they, and I'll let Claudia pick up, you know, from here, but what they were expressing was that we're in a time where there's a lot of revolutions happening, but they don't necessarily have to be violent. They're revolutions in thinking, revolutions in the way we look at things and so forth. And there's also a lot happening in the scientific world too, and they told us a lot about things that were going to evolve up to the point where they are. But they also said the transition time you're in is going to come to a close, and things are going to start to really level out into a very, very different Earth that you see right now in the year 2037. And so the time period from now to then is when all this transition is happening. And I wanted to turn it over to you if there's anything you wanted to, I mean, I have 7 pages of a notebook filled with stuff from it, but.
Well, the sense from this group, and that I identified, I said, what can I call you? That's always an interesting. They call themselves Einstein. They laughingly said, well, his intelligence is part of our group, so we'll call ourselves Einstein, so you can identify the pioneering quality. And that sense of going across dimensions in a time period where there's less differentiation between physical and non-physical. What I see is that it gets a little tricky because we have these delineations between this is me in my physical world, and then this is the non-physical. And I actually was listening to John Array the other day say we don't go anywhere. You know, when she was visiting here and talking about what we essentially do is resonate differently. And I remember that when one of the, I think it was Karoli Baba, who was, you know, in the process of dying, and his disciples were crying for him and saying, please, Master, don't leave us. And he said, where would I go? And I think that's about what it is, that we are moving into a different resonance. And so as we collectively engage that, it's tumultuous. It's like in the airplane when you hit turbulence, and you know, it's sort of, you can feel the difference. You can feel the sort of resonances pushing up against each other, and it makes for a bumpy ride because there are ways of perceiving something, and if the perceptual mechanisms don't work to include these other things, you know, there's going to be friction and tension. And so what we're in right now is there is a whole vanguard of people. I mean, look at the room. You know, people that have come in to say, we know there's more. We know that we're expanding into something. We know that we're growing. And this is happening all over the world. And, you know, and the image I'm getting is that at some point as that occurs, we also deal with like the sludge rising from the bottom of the pot. To say these are the parts that are unintegrated, these are the parts that are congealed. And so many people all over the world are in the process of having lovely, wonderful groups like this and raising the awareness and the frequency so that as we kind of hit critical mass, we move into a very different rate of vibration. And what they said, this group said, 2037 is a pivot point. It's when critical mass is really raised, and at that point, it sort of goes out at a different level. It kind of goes, it's much faster, but it's going to take some time for all of these different pieces, especially since there are, you know, I'm very visual. That's why my work is with dreams and images a lot. But I get the image of the golem in The Lord of the Rings. You know, this abandoned, naked, for anyone who's seen this, sort of pathetic creature who's hanging on to his ring like it's all he's got. And he's cast out, and he's feeling like he's holding on to what he's got. And the idea of being incorporated into something larger is very scary and very threatening, because the feeling is, what if I lose what I have? What if it's too scary. So we're dealing with a lot of, you know, a lot of the energies, a lot of the people that are like the golems, you know, they're holding on to their little piece of the ring and saying, you know, it's precious to me, but it's very scary to move into something bigger. But it's happening and it's good, and we are reassured that, you know, we are moving collectively, from an evolutionary perspective, into a very positive future of possibilities and dreams.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, what about the significance of 2012? You know, that's been the buzz for many years now.
That's a hard one because people concretize everything. You know, and they want a date. It's this date, it's this time, it's this, you know, it's precisely 7:06 on 2012. And I think that the Mayans could perceive this shift, of course. And of course, we also deal with the interdimensional piece where we're not looking at linear time. So the Mayans weren't looking way ahead and saying, you know, oh, look at that, there's a shift happening out there. They were kind of looking at it this way. They were in that dimensional meeting place where they were seeing, here is approximately the time when all of this really sort of hits pinnacle. And that's my own belief about that, is that we're in it, we've been in it. Whether there's a specific sort of marker that will come up on that day that everyone goes, oh, look at that. You know, but that it's identifying, I think, that pinnacle where things are turning.
And definitely a period of transition in the sense that, like T.S. Eliot's poem where he says, in my end is my beginning. You know, in the Hindu idea of the cyclical nature of time and experience, they have their own trinity, which sometimes people in the West misinterpret as being different gods that are being worshipped, but they're just three aspects of the divine. One of them is Brahma, which is the divinity of creation, the divine energy that creates things. In the Hebrew, the equivalent to the aspect of God that creates is Elohim. And by the way, in Hebrew, every once in a while I see something a book where somebody is channeling the Elohim. Well, the Elohim are not a they, it's a we. There's not a group of beings called Elohim. You know, there's a Nephilim, and that's the plural ending, you know, in Hebrew. But Elohim is a plural name for God, meaning this is the God that encompasses a multitude of possibilities beyond what we can even count. So the plural name for God is given to represent endless multitude of dimensions of the divine. So that's why the plural is used with Elohim. So it's not a group of them. So the Elohim is also that quality of God as the creator, which is used 5 times in the beginning of the book of Genesis in Hebrew. But then in the Hindu system it moves to Vishnu as the sustainer, and then Shiva is the destroyer. But not destroyer in terms of bringing things to an end, because we have such a linear view of things in Western culture. It's cyclical, and it's bringing things to an end so that whole new cycles may begin. There has to be that part that brings things to a close so that the new may arise again. And that's what this, I think, concept of 2012 is. And as I was reading something by Tom Kenyon the other day, where an interview where he was asked about 2012 as the big change can happen, he said, well, it's just like the odometer in my car. You know, when I'm at 999, and when my odometer turns 100,000, like my car doesn't stop and I just disappear, you know, the odometer just starts all over again.
I have a funny thing that I have to add. We saw an interview with Ingo Swann. I don't know if anyone knows who that is, but he was one of the premier remote viewers for the military, and a psychic and an artist in New York. He's quite elderly now, and he just got tired of doing the military thing, and he went back to New York to paint. But they said to him, why do you think that the Mayan calendar stopped at 2012? And he said after 3,500 years of making calendars, they just got tired of making calendars.
That's a great answer.
I loved it. It's like, let's be concrete about this.
Well, what about the idea of reality or duality versus non-duality?
Okay.
Well,
I'll start.
these simple questions.
Yeah, this is I've been pondering this for a while.
Well, it's interesting. As long as we're in 3D, we're going to have some duality. Because that's the way we're strung together. And our perceptual mechanisms are strung together to ordinarily tuned to to duality. It doesn't mean that we don't move beyond it. It means that the ordinary perceptual functions are set to a certain frequency for a certain channel. It's like getting 92.5 every time you turn on your radio. But I had an experience with an energy that represented the first step down into duality from, from the non-dual. And I think it's this gradual, it's the foot in both worlds piece, that as long as we're in bodies and we're experiencing through physical mechanisms, brains and nervous systems and such, we're going to deal with duality. It's that capacity to be in both places at once, where part of us, and you can't even verbalize it at that point, because how do you verbalize, non-duality? We have no language for it. We can verbalize it in maybe certain ways. We would make a sound or play an instrument or do a dance or do a painting or a sculpture, but it's that, I think that's the dance that we're doing that, that course in, it's like double dutch, you're stepping back and forth between, here we are in duality, here we are in non-duality, and somehow creating something new out of the tension. And I think that's the other piece, that it's like, to me, when you play a high note in a musical composition and a very low note, there's a tension that gets created. It's kind of, and out of that tension, you get the new creation.
And I can give a response to that based on these archetypal words from these ancient languages. One of the things that's interesting in terms of archetypal words, I also look at as words in which the sound of the word itself contains the inner meaning of the word. And when you look at the ancient words for peace, it's amazing how the sounds are the same. In Sanskrit, it's shanti. In Hebrew, it's shalom. In Arabic, it's salam. And I lived in Ireland for 2 years in the West Coast in an Irish-speaking area, and I learned how to speak Irish Gaelic. And the Irish Gaelic word for peace is shihan. So you have, listen to these sounds, shanti, shalom, salam, shihan.